as you can see from my beard, it is cold. Nick's got a little bit there too. Okay, we're back up on our mountain with the wide 9. We found some old tracks from about 3 days ago down at the bottom. They walked right by my tent blind. I mean, he literally tried to get in and warm up. But we're not finding a lot of tracks. It is definitely pretty barren up here, but we're thinking they're up over the top here in the bowl. There's 2 cuts up in there, and we're going to try to get up in there and cut a track. But
in the summer of 2018, a giant wide-ragged buck appeared on our trail cams. We dubbed him the Wide 9. But unknown to us at the time, many hunters up to 5 miles away were getting pics of him and had him in their sights. We focused our efforts on a 635-acre piece that we had access to. But after tracking him 3 times, it became apparent his area he traveled was much larger than we first suspected. Well, Chance and I are on our way to our first shed hunt of the season. He's getting ready. We're gonna go after the Wide 9. See if he's dropped. We got a couple of cameras we're gonna put out. Well, his sheds were never found, as I received this photo later that day. Alright, here we are. We're with the Big 9. You remember me talking about him quite a bit this year because he drove us nuts. We tracked him 3 or 4 times, had 3 actual opportunities on him and didn't get him. And Troy here,
right?
Troy, yeah. Troy here sealed the deal on him. 6 miles pretty much from where we tracked him. 6 miles from his core area, what we think is his core area. And he just scored, James, what did he score?
137 and an 8.
137 and an 8. Here he is, in all his glory, without the rest of him here. That's in here right now.
Yes.
Anyways, yes, Troy, kind of just give us an idea what happened. Just run us through it real quick.
Well, I actually wasn't even going to go out and hunt that morning, and I did. I was going to go across the street where he wasn't, and I decided to go on the other side of the road. And just went out, sat down. I was there about a half hour. And he kept walking around. Yeah, and just to talk about it, I get shaken, you know.
Yeah.
It's so massive and so big, and never seen nothing like it in my life. So I'm pretty proud of him. Yeah. I feel bad. I, sat down and actually never had to chase him like you guys did.
Yeah. Hey, his time was up, I think.
Yeah.
His time was up.
I agree.
He kind of escaped us for a couple
Absolutely.
of times.
Yeah. So yeah.
What time of day was it when you?
About 7 in the morning.
7 in the morning.
Yeah. Just before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's pretty awesome. And he weighed how much?
195.
195.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I can't say that I envy you, because I do.
What was the day?
I'm glad.
Day killed?
28th.
28th of November?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so that would have been about a week after the last time we tracked him, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was the end of the month, it was the last time we saw him. And he was kind of heading out this way at that point.
Yeah.
So I think he had bred the does that was in that area, and he kind of
Absolutely.
came over this way looking for some more ladies. So.
Sure. Yep.
But congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys. Yeah.
That's gonna be a good mount.
Yeah, it is.
For sure.
It'll be gorgeous.
We're here with Furs to Fins Taxidermy is where you're having it done.
Yep.
And we'd love to see a picture of it when it gets all finished. So
we'll be the first. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We give him some free advertising. He does a good job from what we can see here. So.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. Yep.
It's hard to find a good taxidermist these days, and everybody out there should know that. And
some of these young up-and-comers, I don't know how young he is.
28.
28.
Yeah.
Some of these younger guys are doing some crazy stuff that looks really good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, there's that deer. So back to you, back there at the hacienda.
There was another wide buck I had on the public that I hunted. He got his name from being a dominant buck in a huge bachelor group. I had pictures of him starting in 2016, sheds from 2017, but never saw him on the hoof until the summer of 2018. I knew he was a good buck, but, as bucks often do during the rut, he was off chasing girls onto an adjacent piece of posted property I didn't have permission to hunt. On Easter of 2016, Chance and I went out shed hunting. We found 3 great antlers that day. The last of the trio was a big frame 5-point side that looked to be off a 3.5-year-old. I knew right away he was special. As it was the 3rd shed of the day, I dubbed him Hat Trick. I searched for the remainder of 2016 and never did find the match. In 2017, I tried hard to get him on camera. I got him once in December, and that was it. I never did get his sheds that year, and I looked a lot to no avail. I had a chance at him during the rifle season of 2017 and missed him at 48 yards. I made it my mission to kill him in 2018. I tried again and never did get him on camera until October. Then, November 2018 came, and only 2 days after the firearm opener, the quest for Hat Trick was over, and not by my hand.
Alright, hopefully you all remember and recognize this deer. I do. This is a Hat Trick. James just measured him. He's 142 and 2/8. I'll remember that for the rest of my life because I didn't get him. But congratulations to Rob Godfrey for getting that. And I hope it looks good. Of course, it will. So, we just wanted to do a little feature on him. You see his little point there? That's what he used to destroy trees with. Alright, so in 2018, I had gotten a picture of a big 8-pointer that we were really interested in. The wife really thought he was really good looking. He was very symmetrical, very big, big-bodied. Really thought he's definitely top of the list. So after I've gone out and tracked with everybody else and helped him, gave him some opportunities, I decided to go out myself. And of course, I had the camera with me every single hunting trip. I've filmed and filmed and filmed, and I get up that morning, I'm getting all the stuff that I needed just for myself, and the one thing I end up forgetting, what do you think it was? Was it my gun? Was it bullets? Was it my Copenhagen? No. You know what I forgot? I forgot the camera. And then finally it was time for me to really get on it. So we had a good fresh snow one morning, and I'd gone out, and it took me forever to get on a track. I got in the woods at like 5:30 in the morning. It was still dark, and I kind of was working up this area, and I couldn't find a fresh track anywhere. So I had really thought that day was going to be a bust. I mean,
sometimes you get out there at 5:30 in the morning, you get someplace by 7, you think you've been out there all day. And if you're hunting, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I got up in this one spot that I had some pictures of that 8-pointer before, and it was about 9 o'clock, and I had just come up over this little hump, and bam, there's a fresh track. And I mean smoking hot fresh. Big track. There was a bunch of doe tracks in there with him. There was a couple other buck tracks, but that one track was really big. So I remember I texted my wife. I said, game on. Took a picture of the track, sent it to her. Because all season, I had gone out a couple of times and hadn't run into a good track anywhere. So I was kind of excited, and I was hoping it was the deer we call freeze frame, that big 8. Got on the track, and he was moving pretty good. He was straight legging for quite some time, and then he turned, and I thought he was J-hooking, but he kept going. And after a while, I figured out that he was following some does that had gone in and J-hooked, and they had gone to bed. So basically, I followed him up, and he went quite a ways up the side of the mountain into another spot that I was pretty familiar with. And I thought I was going to catch him bedding, but I didn't. What he did is he had gone up, he had swung around, and just checked the beds and kept going. So he had gone up along this one ridge that has these huge ravines that go down in the bottom. And the wind was coming up out of the ravines at this point in the day, so I knew he wasn't going to win me. I was in a good position to be behind him. And I kept moving pretty fast, knowing that he was probably, I would say, probably 2 hours ahead of me. And we moved pretty fast through this one section. And the snow was fairly deep. I'm not going to say it was real deep, because in this section, this part of the woods that I hunt, we're not as high up as we were when we had tracked for James and for Aaron. Those two areas were up thigh-deep snow on north sides. This was on the south-facing side that he was doing most of his moving, so the snow was only halfway up my shins. So the moving weren't too bad, but still, it was wet. It was warm that day. So it was really hard moving quick in some of the sections. It was real slippery. And you'd get on some of these side hills. Some of these ravines drop in pretty good, so he was just touching the very tops of these draws when they come up. He just kicked the top of them. And he was moving right along. And then he left the doe track. The doe track had gone into some real thick balsam. And he left it, and he went around and stayed on top of these draws and went around towards the face of the mountain, which is facing, I believe, east. And he dropped into a little hollow and stopped. And he had stopped there for quite some time, and he had fed a little bit on some balsam and some hemlock, that was there. And I knew at that point that he was getting ready to bed down. We had gone probably at this point, probably about a mile. I tracked him. So I knew if he was going to bed, he was going to be somewhere between where that balsam is and where it switches over to hardwood. And I went step by step. I was pretty much still hunting really slow. 3 steps, stop, look, wait, listen. And I did that for probably an hour, and then I ran into his bed. And he had gotten up before I got there. There was no running. He wasn't running out of the bed. The bed was still pretty, the tracks hadn't melted out or anything, so I knew he was pretty close. So at that point I had to figure if I wanted to swing down or swing up and try to get ahead of him. But I decided to stay on the tracks. I figured he was far enough ahead of me that I wasn't going to jump him right off. Got on the track, and the way that mountain lays is you have the mountain here, you have your draws. He swung around the front, came up, and it drops down into this big valley on the back side. And it's all hardwood, it's all maple and all beech, and there's a little bit of oak on there, but not much. So I crested the top of that hill, and he had jumped off this cliff that, I'll call it a cliff, it was basically a drop-off. It was probably 8 feet. And he wasn't running, he got to that and stopped, and he walked back and forth on top of this little little drop and was winding. The air was coming up. He winded there for, it looked like 5-10 minutes. And then it was like he get shot out of a cannon. He jumped off that drop, hit the bottom, and bounded down the hill. So at first I thought he had caught me moving. But in the back of my mind, I kept saying, I think he winded some does. He probably winded those same does that he left to go bed down. So I walked down along the edge, got in the bottom. I dropped down probably 2 tiers into that valley, and his track just kept going down. Well, just as I started to text, I looked up and I saw a doe. And she was only 30 yards from me. So they were digging up ferns to eat, or other succulents and forbs or whatever they were eating out of the snow. All of a sudden there was another doe and another doe. They were all down in front of me. And they weren't, like I said, they were about 30 yards away. So I'm watching the does, and I thought it was kind of neat. They were pretty close. The wind's still coming up the hill. The thermals were feeding up the valley, so they weren't winding me. And I was kind of underneath a bunch of hemlock, underneath a bunch of hemlocks back against the tree trunk, so they didn't really see me. And as I was watching them, I could see that big buck's track heading down past where they went. So as I'm looking at the does, I can see this movement way down at the bottom of the hill where the valley kind of flattens out, coming out of a bunch of hemlock. And it's a buck. And I knew for an instant it wasn't that big 8 that I was thinking, but then again I was thinking there's probably more than one buck around here. So he was working his way up, and I blew on my grunt tube. And the does didn't pay any mind to it. And he lifted his head up, and he's looking all around. He started working his way up, and then he stops dead in his tracks, and his hair comes up on the back of his neck, and he starts doing that sideways thing where they walk sideways and all stiff-legged. All of a sudden, that giant 8 comes out of another section of hemlock that are closer to me, comes right up, and they get right into it. And they go at it for, 5 minutes anyways, back and forth and chase and bang, and they're crashing into stuff. And then all of a sudden, I thought, okay, these does had moved off a little bit. They had headed down to my left over the hill. And I says, if I can get up to this maple tree that's 30 yards ahead of me where them does were, I can shoot that big 8. And they weren't, those 2 bucks weren't paying any attention to what's going on. They had their heads down and just going back and forth. So I start heading towards that tree, and I take 2 steps out of them hemlocks, and 10 yards ahead of me over this little drop, there's a doe bedded there that I never even knew was there. And she blew up, and she took off, blowing and whatnot, and then she took off running. All them other does took off running down to my left, and then hung back into the woods behind me. The two bucks, they looked up and off they went, right with the does. So I knew I blew it. At that point, I thought I was done. So I waited. Whenever I blow a deer out, I always give it 10, 15 minutes to kind of get out there and get calmed down. Sometimes a half an hour, depending. So I waited about 15 minutes right there. I ate my lunch, and I got back up and I started heading down. Well, I says, I'll just get right back. I'll go down, get on that big buck's track, and I'll follow him. So I get on his track, and he's got the other buck with him who wasn't that much smaller rack, but basically the same size body. And we headed onto that track. All of a sudden, I see a deer's, I get through a bunch of little hemlock, and I look, and it's all open hardwoods, and I see over this little hump, this little rise, I see a deer's back moving towards me. So I'm thinking that maybe one of those big bucks had circled back around. Well, I didn't have a whole lot of cover where I was, but I did my best. I got down behind a maple tree about that big, got down on one knee, got the gun up, got ready. the deer comes through and he walks and he turns and he's heading right to me and he picks his head up. And it's a little, I think he was a fork-horn, six-pointer. He was a little six-pointer. He had like forks with two little tiny brow tines on there. And he's heading right towards me. And when I mean heading right towards me, I mean if he took off running and he was blind, he would have took me out. So I'm standing here in complete amazement that this buck is walking towards me. The wind's coming from this side, right like this. Blowing my wind up. He's coming this way. So, and I'm behind this little dinky tree. I'm wearing, I think I was wearing these brown pants that I got on now, and I was wearing my green Johnson coat, bright orange vest. He's walking, and he gets probably 15 feet from me, and there's a log. And he's eating mushrooms off the log, and then he's eating ferns. He's digging up ferns right in front of me. I can see the pupils of his eyes. I can see the whiskers. I see him nose moving. He listens, sniff. I can see every movement of that deer. See him chewing, spit coming out the sides of his mouth. It was crazy. So he goes to step over the log, and now he gets one leg over that log. He's 5 feet from me. I literally could take my gun and touch him on the end of the nose. And he finally looks at me, and he puts his head down and eats some more. Steps the other foot over the log. This deer is, now I'm a little nervous because if he spooks, he may kick me in the face. He might run me over. I don't want to shoot him. He's way too small. Finally, the wind kind of does this shifting, hits him in the face, and it was just like I had taken a 2x4 and racked him right upside the head. And he stood back, looked at me, blew, and I can tell you when they're 5 feet from you and they blow, you get covered with snot. Yeah, there's stuff that comes out of their nose when they do it. And it's loud. I knew he was going to do it, but I still jumped. That's how loud it was. And he took 2 bounds off this way, got out in the hardwoods, stood back and stared at me. And at that point I says, okay, I've had enough time dealing with this. I'd been there for probably 20 minutes. So I got on my feet, waved to that buck and said, see you later. And I got on that track and got going. Well, I didn't go very far. I probably went only 50 yards down over the hill. Heading back. Now we're heading back to, instead of going to the east, like that valley sets to the east, now I'm heading back to the west. And on that northwest side, it's all hemlock and spruce, really dark woods. But I was still in the hardwoods. So I'm heading down to the hardwoods. There's a old stone wall that runs down with a bar gap in it, down probably 50 yards, and a doe comes running out of that bar gap at 100 miles an hour. Tail up, heading off to my left. Heading back. Basically the way I generally came onto the mountain. So I watched the doe go, and I turned back and I watched that bar gap, and all of a sudden here comes that big 8, walks up to the edge of that bar. So he walks up to that bar gap, and he stands there just on the other side of the bar gap. And you're asking yourself, why didn't you shoot? Well, I'll tell you why. Because there's posted signs all along that stone wall. He's on the opposite side. I'm not going to break the law. Now I know a lot of you guys will come up with some kind of silly thing to say, but I ain't doing that. Anyways, so I waited, and I waited. And I figured he was just going to bust right through that bar gap and head towards that doe. Nope. That big mature buck 6 cents told him he didn't want to do that. So what did he do? I saw him put his head down to the ground, and I thought he was coming. So I got the gun up, waiting for him to come through the bar gap, and he doesn't come. He doesn't come. I look, he's gone. He had headed directly down that stone wall until he dropped down another little bench, jumped the fence, and went out where I couldn't see him. Got on his track again. Off I went. All of a sudden, that mountain, it goes down, there's 2 benches, and then it goes right down. And they were heading down that hill. There was 2 bucks and 2 does. All of a sudden, one doe peels off from them. They stay on that one doe, 2 bucks, right down the hill. Now we've gone another, I don't know, following them down that mountain, probably another quarter of a mile, half a mile, and now down through the trees, I can kind of see. Now I'm sitting there saying to myself, if they cross that road, it's posted land on the other side. I don't normally like to track in these places, but I knew that that big buck was on that mountain. Usually I try to track in a place that's got 1,000 acres or more of no posted. And yes, there's plenty of that around. So I could see the tracks heading towards the road, so I kind of figured that they had crossed the road. And I didn't want to go walk all the way down this hill, because it's steep. It's literally this steep going down. And I didn't want to go all the way to the road just to have them cross the road and have to walk all the way back up. I figured if I skated the top of the mountain, I might catch another buck on that other doe, or catch one coming down, because there's all of a sudden all this deer activity. I didn't know how many deer were there. So I started skating the side of the hill, and I got to this another edge of another ravine that dropped down the hill, and there was another bench on the other side. As I got to the edge of that drop, I heard this noise. And it's been about an hour since I last saw those deer. So I hear this noise. And it sounded, I'm not kidding, it sounded like a duck. I'm not joking. It sounded like a duck. So I'm looking up. I figured there's a duck flying over, right? So I hear it again. I look up again. And then it's a little bit closer. I hear it again. And I look across the ravine, and I see a doe walking up. And that ravine, it drops down pretty deep. The other side is steep. I'm on the flatter side, but it's steep and it's going up. And I see the doe heading up the hill. So I look down, and I can make out two bucks. Heads down, trailing up. And the one in the back kept making the... I never heard a buck grunt like that before. It was really higher pitched than some of the bigger bucks I've heard. This one was sound like a duck. So I get the gun up, no shot, really thick hemlock brush, no shot at all. Even though it was only like 30 or 40 yards across, no shot. They head up, and they start running after the doe. Well, at this point, I was like, it's now or never. I got to make this happen, or else I'm going to run out of daylight. So I literally run across that ravine, down, up, and start running up the hill off that track. And I'm not built for running. My legs are not as long as the rest of my body. You know, they're short. So I'm not a runner. But at that point in time, the adrenaline was flowing, and I was going. So I followed them up, and they went way up. I mean, this hill was open, but it was go way up through. And then I got to the top, and their tracks kept going like up. So I stood there for a minute, and I'm heaving. I mean, I just run up a steep hill like that for, I don't know, 400 or 500 yards in the deep snow. So I'm standing there for a minute, and all of a sudden I look, and there goes the doe. She heads down the hill. So I look behind, and I see a buck coming through the trees. And at this point, I'm not counting points. I look, he's got a rack. And when I last saw him, the bigger 8-pointer was right behind the doe, closer behind the doe, and the smaller rack buck was behind him. So away they go. Comes through. I just saw the doe go. Just kind of dipped through the trees. And I see this buck, a big-bodied buck. Big, long, deep, big buck. He's got antlers. I wait for him. He gets in front of me. Pow! Drops right there. And I looked at my gun. I looked at the deer. And the deer's, he's kicking a little bit. And so I put another one in, got ready. He gets up. He's woozy. And he takes 2 steps. I get another opening. I shoot. He runs about 15 yards. He falls over. He kicks a few times and then stops moving. I sat down. And I sat down for about 10 minutes and rested, by the way. So I shoot this deer. Bang, bang, down. As I sit down on the stump, the log that was behind me, I look up. There's the big 8 and there's the doe in the ravine to my right, looking back at me, heading out. So all I could think of was he was still behind the first deer, and the first deer was off to the side of that doe when she was bipping along, and I didn't see him. I couldn't see him anyway. He's probably down over the hill. But they were standing in the ravine as I'm sitting there watching them walk off. And did I care? No, not really. This deer was huge. So it's not about as much about the rags. When I'm shed hunting, it's all about the rag. But when I'm hunting, it's more about deer body size. If I got one with a big giant rack on it, that's pretty cool. But it's not really that important. Anyway, so at this point in time, I had to figure out how to get him back. My truck was about 3 miles, 4 miles away now, and I had to get him at least to a road so I could get somewhere to him. So at first, with all the adrenaline and I'm just so tired, I wasn't thinking, I tried to start dragging him towards the direction of the truck. And then I realized that it'd be 9 o'clock at night before I got him out going that way. So I decided I'd just go straight down the mountain towards that back road. And that was going to be the easiest way. For some reason, I thought that I was closer to the road than I was when I started dragging him. I wasn't thinking that when I left those deer, we were still at least a half to, I don't know, almost a quarter of a mile from the road that I could see it down the bottom of the mountain. But I had gone back up and cut up on an angle after those deer. So now I was probably about 1.5 miles from the road. Luckily it was straight downhill. And I can tell you, this big guy here, when I got him going on that wet snow and headed down the mountain, he'd run me over. I'd have to let him go because I couldn't stop him once he got rolling. So I got him to the bottom of the mountain, and I called my wife to go get my truck and meet me there. Got him to the bottom of the mountain. Now the whole track, the actual track, from the time I picked up his track at 9 o'clock to where he got shot, was about 5.5 miles. That did not include the 3.5 miles that I had tried to find a track through the woods, trying to pick up a track before I got there. As far as my tracks go, it wasn't one of my longest ones. I mean, I've gotten tracks that are 12, 11 miles, but for some reason, the mental part of this track was really hard on my brain. I had to do a lot of figuring with him because he did a lot of, what I didn't say before, is he did a lot of backtracking. He'd head out on a trail, and then he'd cut back, and then he'd cut across, and then back. He kept doing these like figure 8 things, and I'm thinking it was to check his back trail, to see if anybody was following him. Sounds strange, but a lot of these older bucks like this, and he is an old buck. He's old. This deer was old. I'm guessing that he was somewhere within 8, 9 years old. So he had played this game before. He was a pretty smart deer, and I'm so lucky to be able to get him. This is the funny part. I have thrown a lot of deer in the back of my truck after dragging them. 160, 170, 150, 120 pound deer. Just kind of get them up in the truck. The two of us could not get this deer in the truck. Now, part of that could have been because I was just completely spent. Part of it could be because she's not a real big woman. But this deer was the hardest deer I ever tried to put in the back of a damn truck. I am telling you what. My truck isn't got a lift. It doesn't have it's an F-150. It doesn't have a lift kit in it. It's not tremendously tall. But to get his front end up onto the tailgate enough so we could drag him in, it took some time. So anyways, I got him hanging up. I got him out here in the truck. Now to get him in the truck was quite the task. My pickup truck's got an 8-foot bed. This deer from front to back took up the whole bed, and I had to push his front legs in, his back legs into the truck. So when he was hanging, he was 10 feet long. I mean, it's a big deer. He didn't fit. I got a Jet Sled Jr. that I used to get him from the truck into the garage, so I didn't have to drag him to lose any fur. And he didn't fit in that. He was hanging out both ends. no matter how I fold them up. Just put it to you this way. I've had 150, 160 pound deer in that sled, and you can get him in the sled. There was no way he was fitting in that sled. Just a big deer. Anyway, so we get him in there, hung him up. He was 10 feet long. Didn't fit in the truck, which was hilarious. This deer yielded 92 pounds of meat.
Boneless.
Boneless. 92 pounds of meat. So, by that, 92 pounds of meat, minus, then that's, no, you know, that was neck, that was everything. That was all boneless meat. I think I lost, and this is after loss, 92 pounds of meat. I lost probably 5 pounds of meat off his shoulder, because I hit him pretty hard in the shoulder. That comes up to about 202 pounds of actual body weight, of dressed body weight, roughly, give or take 2 or 3 pounds. So he was a 200 pound deer as far as I can tell, if you get 92 pounds of meat off him, if you do the figuring. Did I get an official 200 pound deer? Nope, because that's not what the scale said. So what am I going to do? Did I run it around and try to weigh it everywhere? Nope, too tired, didn't want to do it. I figured it would come out. And I know we're doing the quest for 200. It should be more important. But I'm really not that vain about it. I really want one, and it'd be a big thing. But I know what he weighed, and that's all that counts to me. So, does this mean that the quest for 200 is over? Nope. Continues until I get that scale to say 200 plus pounds. It's still going on. So it's a beautiful buck. I had it mounted. A friend of mine mounted it for me, and it was a very memorable hunt. Probably one of my favorites. It was just textbook perfect hunt. A lot of excitement at the end. I had a lot of stuff going on. I had deer everywhere and close-up encounters. So yeah. Anyways. So that's a quest for 200. 2018, we're done. This is the wrap-up. So what I'd like you to do is stay tuned for 2019. Be sure you press subscribe and to like it, because it is pretty cool. So buck, and this old buck I never had on camera. Never had him on camera, never saw him. And I had a lot of bucks on camera that year. He just kind of, I don't know where he came from. I think that one of the guys had a picture of him in a spot close there, but I never got him. So he was kind of a surprise, and what a surprise. Oh, and by the way, freeze frame, yeah, he's still going. Yeah, he's still going. We have new pictures of him that we'll put up in 2019. So, at this point, we'll see you later.